Hi, good morning to everyone at ENIL. It's nighttime here, so I'm kind of fading out. I apologize for that. My name is Bhargavi I am located right now in Kenya, but my work location is Pune in India. It's to the west of India. You might have heard of Mumbai, so I'm very close to this big metropolitan city. I a survivor of Indian psychiatric institutions, having lived with those memories a long, long time, not expecting those memories to leave me in this lifetime. So I think my work has been to see if another way was possible. So inspired by organizations like the Independent Living Movement, ENIL, and several others who are with us on this journey of deinstitutionalization, and delighted that I was able to work with ENIL and other organizations on the DI guidelines. Never thought that I would achieve that, or I would see to achieve that in this lifetime. Seems such a daunting task to do this, but excellent partnership there, made amazing friends, and thanks Ines for getting me to speak at your General Assembly. Really honored and pleased to do this. So yeah, I was looking for another vision for doing mental health work. I joined the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry in 2004. And at that time, there was this brimming hope from the forthcoming Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And my initiation into the movement was, an interview by one of the key leaders of our movement at that time, Tina Minkowitz, and she kind of knocked me about a little bit about whether I was a true survivor or whether I was malingering. And so I figured that out, and it came back. It was not very easy for me to really soak into my identity as a person who is a survivor of psychiatry. Though I have been reading almost my entire life about, anti-psychiatric books, and looking for different ways of doing this mental health care work. So we were in the throes of the CRPD that kind of buoyed us along on a kind of euphoric journey until we got the CRPD on hand. Bapu Trust, the organization I had begun at that time, was very much part of the World Network. It was such good times, I should say, though driven by challenges, and working together. I think for the first time, the cross-disability movements came together to try and work together. I doubt if that was easy on anyone. It definitely was not easy on my peers who fought to get us that legal capacity article with the support of the International Disability Caucus of the times. Yeah, so we came back to 2005, 2006, and by 2007, the CRPD was out. And by 2008, I realized that what the Global North was asking, we could not relate to that in the Global South. The emphasis was on Article 12 and 14, which was mainly about legal capacity and the right to liberty and not be institutionalized on the basis of disability. Well, it made sense, of course. I think those are important rights. But for us, here in the Global South and even in India, which is very post-colonial, so we have a number of institutions. But even here, we do not have the diversity of institutions that you found in the Global North at the time. So there were very few angry users. Maybe I was one of them, but people were asking for community-based services, and not many had entered the institution-based system. India, of course, had a large number at the time, but even then, we were about 40 institutions for the whole country, which was hardly anything. And now it's much more. Over a period of time, the Global South, Asia Pacific is seeing the rise of institutions. So now I understand why the Global North was very furious about violations of Article 12 and 14. We were not. We were looking at Article 19, how to build communities. The lesson learned was that where there is no mental health infrastructure, it was easier to talk about community support systems and community support services. Where the system was highly institutionalized, you only ended up talking about, medication and institutions. What is the choice you have? Informed choice usually boiled down to, do you want this medicine or that medicine, or do you want to go into an institution? There seemed to be very little choice otherwise. Whereas for us, we already have indigenous systems of medicine, which many of us adopt even now. We have communities, families are still, I mean, they're not the best, but they're still intact. You have the social fabric, there is a reasonable amount of freedoms and space. The cities are anonymous. You can disappear if you want to, and no policeman is going to come after you, trying to find out whether you're taking your medicines and so on and so forth. So they have a very different system here. Again, sometimes we're so chaotic and unorganized. Not having those regulatory laws, mental health laws, is good. We don't have the legal infrastructure of mental health legislations that you have in the West. Policemen, they are very underpaid. The law and order machinery would never be able to afford to establish the kind of surveillance over so-called mentally ill patients as you find in the Global North. So finding out that these differences were somewhat irreconcilable at that time, I quit the global movement of World Network and said that I'd like to start working in India with a different perspective. By then, the CRPD was adopted, and we had received CRPD trainings from the International Disability Alliance. We had amazing trainers. I started examining the community support system that I was trying to establish. It was still, at that point, in my estimate, it was too medical. So I literally closed it down, and I started afresh on a new blueprint, which I called the CRPD blueprint of community mental health systems. So then I started to realize that in India, I was the pariah of the mental health. I was the outcast, the untouchable of the mental health, networks that existed. They were mostly into medications, mostly into just medical treatments. Whereas we had a kind of view that there are social economic causes, and there are human rights issues related to being labeled. The mental health system is violative of human rights. So some of these initial ideas, I was not able to express them within my country because once people realized that I'm a survivor and I started to express my identity quite frontally, I was a pariah. I was an untouchable. I was humiliated, all of that. So I started to look for peers outside India. It was a small project within the Bapu Trust where I worked, searching for peers like me who were looking for more human rights-based approaches to work with persons with psychosocial disabilities. So traveled a lot. I continue to travel. And then we had several insights. So at first it was 5 countries. Now we are about 45 countries. We have strong membership in at least about half those countries, emerging leadership. And we started to name ourselves. First, we were called a strategy working group or something for Asia. Then we became transforming communities. Transforming communities for inclusion was a workshop title that we did in 2013 in India. We had 5-country representation. We talked about the focus of TCI, and we decided that we're not going to call ourselves users and survivors of Asia Pacific or something like that, but we will call ourselves transforming communities for inclusion. For us, inclusion in the community meant that we need to talk to like so many people, making requests to them, include persons with psychosocial disabilities. And then for that, we needed to cultivate a demeanor a kind of manifestation, a kind of inner being, which is non-violent. I'm coming from India. The concept of non-violence appeals to me as someone who started this movement. So we started talking about being a peaceful movement, a non-violent movement, and a movement which establishes dialogue with every opportunity with a stakeholder. So in this way, we started, developing our programs. So we cultivate now national leaders in different countries through fellowships. Then we established, we found that in many countries in the Asia Pacific region or in Africa now, there aren't many organized groups of persons with psychosocial disabilities. There are no OPDs of persons with psychosocial disabilities. There would be some 1 or 2 persons roaming about, not knowing what to say, what to do, where to go, whether to join this or whether to join that, where to raise the money. So there were all these issues. So we became more of a like sourcing and capacity building organization for emerging leaders. So we started giving them fellowships. Mentoring is a big part of TCI work. Transferring the culture is a challenge because given the fact that the movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities has become defunct over many years, trying to revive something which is lost, right after the CRPD. It was one of the biggest challenges and continues to be a big challenge. So there were questions: are you competing with the World Network? What's going on? Why are you in places where there are other networks there, so on and so forth. But we believe that we have a vision which is incomparable and cannot be compared with vision of other organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities. We bring the vision of inclusion. We focus primarily on Article 19. So that's, of course, the right to live independently. And we have whole movements working on it. And thanks to all of you. It inspired us as well. So that's where we got. And then how to populate this idea of inclusion. People think that inclusion is it's a value. I'm inclusive, you're inclusive. So what about it? Why do we have to talk about it? But the first time the CRPD gave us the right to inclusion as a full human right. Otherwise, law typically assumes that family, community, all of this is there for people. But actually, it's not there, and we need to talk about it. What happened to community? Who grabbed communities away from us? What kind of policies makes community life impossible? What kind of laws come in the way, interrupting people's lives? So we had to start looking at this. So of course, we have to talk about communities. Social contracting means that there are laws. Social contracting does not mean that there are some sacrosanct places where the law will not touch. Of course not. Between families, between siblings, between everything. If everything is driven by social contract theories, then we should talk about how to save communities from social contracting. And so we started talking about, is every grassroots action about community services? Are there no actions that human beings do which is not driven by a service contract? Again, there is a north-south difference. I think a lot of communities in the areas that we work in Pune and generally in Asia Pacific region, there are services are not as well developed as in the global north. But it makes people watch out for each other. There are altruistic actions going beyond the receipt of a service. There are things people do for each other as just random acts of kindness or bringing the cement of humanity together, being useful to others, so on and so forth. So those sentiments exist. And I think that in different cultures, different contexts, different kinds of sentiments brings people together beyond the notion of service, community service or social care service or healthcare service or social protection service or legal service, whatever. So we hang together as human settlements because over and beyond that, there is something. We call that the psychosocial ecosystem. Call that the psychosocial ecosystem. And it's captured by concepts like peace, solidarity, coming together, and when we enact this in many different ways in different cultures. For example, in India, starting July right up to December, it's like endless festival time. It never stops. You find people coming together, looking fancy, wearing jewelry, dressing up, grooming, visiting families, visiting friends, and it's not a service. I mean, it's things that people do to bring joy to themselves, to experience themselves in a fuller way, as they define themselves, so on and so forth. So there is a whole layer of community which is cemented by sentiments, what we call the psychosocial ecosystem. And it is this ecosystem that TCI really is interested in under Article 19. How do you carry this across as a movement? So we called ourselves the inclusion movement. We are not the user movement, we're not the survivor movement, we're not the consumer movement. We are the inclusion movement of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Our key strategies are dialogue. So we hold enormous number of multi-stakeholder meetings. And those meetings are really effective because when we present the vision of inclusion and what we mean by that, people are inspired by that vision. I think it appeals to everyone. Whereas if we say, don't lock us in, and then people are like, why not? We will do that. And then there is polemic. Psychiatrists will tell us, you need to be inside, and we will tell them, we need to be outside, free of your, gatekeeping and oppressions, all of that. So inclusion brings people together and say that, okay, let's use common sense. All people want to be free. So people with social disabilities want to be free. And we want to work, we want a house, we want a family, this, that. And we'll say, yes, common sense, you're right. So we made a whole kind of, thing about inclusion. And for me, I really secretly laugh because this is really common sense. And why did it elevate to the level of, a human right? But thank God for that. Otherwise, many more countries would have institutions and many more countries would put people away. So we still have hope for the global south. And we want to bring this idea to people in Europe, for example, that retrieving community, whether it be through independent living centers or whether it be through football clubs or whether it be through prayer meetings, we need those. Those bring us good, positive energies, gives us hope to stay together and be for each other. So that's something that, challenges have been many. And I think so one of the key challenges is the fragmentation of our movement. We have leaders, but we don't have leadership. There's no one thinking behind the organization saying that, okay, this organization needs to be around for a long time. It needs to have solid organizational structure and vision. There's nobody refreshing visions, and so many organizations become emptied out. They become what my peer calls a skull. They become a skull, and there's nothing there. So let's all work towards refreshing the organization. And I think that the DI guidelines is a big place to do that bit. It gives lots of ideas and practices to go with them. So thank you, Ines, for calling me in. I wish that I could have met your members, but I'm in travels, and I hope to meet you all someday. Have a good day today, and good general assembly. Bye.